Story 1. The apparatus cares more about corporations than about helping working people and their families through policy. Story 2. A lot. My biggest problem with them is that when they feel particularly courageous, they send a strongly worded letter or wear coordinated colorful socks. Sometimes they do both. There are a few exceptions among their ranks, so I have hope for the future. The rest barely budge from the status quo when they have power. Our options are terrible most of the time, or terrible and actively breaking things and directing money to their friends. This is why I support ranked choice voting. Story 3. I hate that two parties exist, and supporting one means you wholeheartedly agree with all of their stances and hate the opposition. It is beyond stupid. Story 4. They cannot get anything done. They are mediocre, hold the most banal, lukewarm political stances imaginable, and are far too willing to give in to the opposing party. Story 5. They spend all their time purity testing each other. They show no real or feigned empathy toward middle and lower-class Americans and are completely out of touch with who their actual base should be. Story 6. I feel like I do not have a party anymore because of the absolute lunacy and hatred that seem to be the norm. Story 7. Every last bit of corporate fellatio and allegiance to foreign lobbyists that they have committed since 1992. Also, superdelegates hijacking the primary process. Story 8. The Democrats gave up on white working-class males. In retrospect, that was not the best strategy. Story 9. They cannot send stronger messages. Not harsher, just more direct. Story 10. I am over both moral purity tests and outrage farming. Story 11. My party once served the people and now serves corporations and billionaires. We need a new Democratic Party. Story 12. It is toxic. It lacks substance. They focus only on criticizing the other party. Nothing improves as a result. They do not want to help their constituents. They vote along party lines and oppose anything the other party proposes. Story 13. I feel like not long ago, or perhaps I was just young and naive, both parties were working to make things better. They had different ideas about how to get there, but the debate was still focused on the problems. I would be disappointed if my party lost, but I still had confidence in the other candidate to govern. Lately, it feels like the entire focus is on obstructing the other party's agenda. There is no bipartisanship. The relationship is entirely adversarial. Never mind whether a policy helps or hurts. If it did not originate on this side of the aisle, it is dismissed as garbage. In summary, our inability to work on issues in a bipartisan fashion. Story 14. Democrats can't do anything right. Their decisions are driven by focus groups and fear of missteps, which results in inaction. Look at Kamala. Why did she not pick Pete? Pete is, frankly, more masculine than Tim Walz. They are still playing by an antiquated rulebook of norms. They die on issues that Republicans bait them on, issues that are far down the list of priorities. They need to let those issues go, win, and then quietly move policy in the right direction. I hate them so much, but I want free healthcare. Stronger antitrust enforcement to curb corporate greed. More scientific research. A successful economy for all, because the current minimum wage is absurd. And globalism with increased trade with our partners and acceptance of immigrants to improve the economy and our reach. Story 15. They should drop the gun ban rhetoric and be the party of personal freedom. Also, pursuing gun restrictions given the direction this country is heading is very short-sighted. Story 16. The leadership is overly moderate and timid in its thinking. Story 17. They worry about testing every message instead of just saying what they think. Story 18. I get to vote for the same central casting generic law school graduate since Mondale. Ooh, will they be from Harvard Law School or maybe Georgetown Law this time? How exciting, such variety. Story 19. We need to talk to the other side and not get emotional about it. Story 20. I hate how they are so quick to turn on each other at any sign of not perfectly following the current movement. They demand perfect lockstep with their ideals or nothing at all. They consistently shoot themselves in the foot. They claim they want candidate A and hate candidate Z, but when they discover something undesirable about candidate A, instead of supporting candidate B, who is very similar and is running, they refuse to vote out of spite and enable candidate Z to win. For example, someone might say they wanted Bernie Sanders but were given Kamala Harris. Because Kamala has problematic views on Palestine, they will vote for Donald Trump. Story 21. Democrats have no balls, and that's why they always end up in situations like this. They are too afraid of even upsetting a sliver of their base, so they always play it safe. Story 22. They take their base for granted, talk a lot, do very little, and are led by cowards. Story 23. It seems easier to get us to turn out for a protest than to vote. Story 24. I am a civilian and not owned by a political party. Whoever has better policies gets my vote. Story 25. Identity politics. If laws guaranteed equal rights for everyone regardless of personal characteristics, political debate could focus on the issues affecting different socio-economic classes in America. Focus on the middle class and create programs to help lower-income families move into it. Who cares whether someone in the lower or middle class is black or white, or who they are in a relationship with? We are all in the same sinking ship as the top 1% continues to stand on our shoulders. Story 26. Members of Congress from my party have ceded the power of the legislative branch to a megalomaniac. They don't like him but won't fight him. Get your dander up, Congress. You know how to write policy that he cannot selectively dismantle. Now do your job. Story 27. They spend too much time trying to be moderate and kowtow to corporate interests while torpedoing young up-and-comers who have fresh ideas and look out for regular people. I will still vote for them over the other team, but my enthusiasm is waning. Story 28. I have been a registered Democrat my entire life, deeply committed to the party's values. However, I am increasingly frustrated by the leadership's tendency to cater to the most far-left voices. This pandering often overshadows the pragmatic, inclusive approach that resonates with moderates like me and my peers. It is disheartening to see this disconnect, as it risks alienating those of us who believe in balanced progress and causes us to question our loyalty. I hope for a renewed focus on unity and practical solutions that can bring us together. Story 29. I dislike that the Republican Party is against abortion. I can see how you think it is murder, but depending on the situation, it might be necessary. Story 30. I am aligned with a party that should be tougher on criminals in executive offices. Pedophiles should be imprisoned for life. Story 31. They act as if everything is racist, including Taylor's new album. I think that pushes people away. To be fair, it sometimes feels like people on both sides are desperate to be offended. Story 32. The Democrats do not understand partisan framing. Instead of calling tariffs Trump taxes, they call them tariffs, even though tariffs are taxes imposed by Trump. Democrats refuse to play dirty the way Republicans do. Story 33. Corporatists help people just enough to play the stock market and accept lobbyist money they should not. Story 34. Not having a party that aligns with my values and being forced to choose the lesser of two evils every time instead of being able to choose what is truly good. Story 35. They are perfectly willing to call out anti-Semitism when it is on the other side, but unwilling to deal with it in their own ranks. Story 36. Absolute spinelessness. Every time they lose to the Republicans in an election, they stand together, stroke their chins, and ask the same questions. Maybe we are not racist enough. Maybe we need to be more racist and promise more border violence, which will supposedly win votes from moderate conservatives, a voter base that supposedly exists and is not already voting Republican. Come on. Running a platform that only says we are not as bad as the Republicans is not going to cut it anymore. You need to give people something to vote for. Story 37. They need to focus on the core issues of governing and not be dragged down a rabbit hole that a loud, vocal minority considers more important. Story 38. I dislike the Republican Party so much that, as a conservative, I no longer identify with any party. Story 39. Both sides are beholden to billionaires. I know this and I vote left-leaning. Story 40. We don't have 50 years of experience, practice, and established belief-shifting institutions like the Republicans. When people bemoan the Democrats' lack of cohesion, vision, and effective public relations, that absence is the root cause. Story 41. As a registered independent, Can I rail against both of those feckless parties that do not represent sane moderates? Story 42. This thread. My party had their main presidential candidate drop out mid-race and appointed the sitting vice president without holding any sort of primary, as they were supposed to. Replies. Oh my goodness. I do not know which party you could possibly be talking about. I have no idea. This is a tough one. Story 43. They capitulate to economic terrorists with regard to basic human rights. Story 44. Their most aggressive actions are sending strongly worded letters and pushing their reading glasses further down their noses. Story 45. I don't belong to a party. I vote Democrat, but many who call themselves revolutionaries think we can just overthrow the government. They're all talk and never do anything beyond being keyboard warriors. They put ideology over pragmatism. They focus on microaggressions and politically correct language, saying unhoused instead of homeless or pregnant person instead of woman. You have to meet people where they are, not where you think they should be. Maybe that's ideal, but it puts people off when we need numbers. Nobody likes the language police. It's different if people are using slurs or being overtly bigoted. But I'm talking about little nitpicky things. Pick your battles. Boiled down, a lot of people on the left need to live in the real world. Story 46. Constant purity checking. Libertarians often denounce each other as not real libertarians. Can we focus more on what we agree on and less on what we do not? Story 47. Being rude and then playing the victim when the opposition does the same. Zero self-reflection. Story 48. I don't really have one, but most people would consider me leftist. I dislike the purity testing infighting among smaller groups on the left. Story 49. The Democratic Party is a mess, disorganized, indecisive, and constantly showing up to gunfights armed with pool noodles. The alternative left is just as self-righteous and clueless as the alternative right. Different slogans, same tunnel vision. Story 50. They decided that underage transgender girls participating in sports were the hill to die on. Story 51. It is one of two. My political preferences do not fit neatly into either party. Story 52. Unwilling to admit that extremism exists on our side, and many are snobs, which leaves out a large population of voters. Story 53. I don't necessarily identify as a Democrat, but my values definitely align more with that side than with any other. The Democratic Party is a group of self-righteous people who like to point fingers and condemn everyone for not being perfect, rather than actually making any changes. They can't get out of their own way. Story 54. Single-issue non-voters. Go ahead, pick a side in an ethno-religious conflict to which you have no connection. I am sure absorbing one-sided propaganda will help you fix the world's problems. Cheering the deaths of innocent people is presented as acceptable as long as they are the right kind of people. Story 55. The issues they address seem to be chosen at random, as if they are picking names out of a hat. Story 56. Those more moderate than I am are useless and ineffective. Those more extreme than I am are just shitty. Story 57. When they get a chance to act, they take too long to check every possible factor, which gives the Reds too many opportunities to disrupt, defund, and derail the projects. Story 58. The claim is that there are only two major parties, and they exist to create division among the public instead of holding wealthy people accountable for exploiting everyone. Story 59. Here in Australia, voting is mandatory. Every party that refuses to abolish it is complicit. Story 60. There is too much establishment bullshit. Be charismatic and bold like Barack Obama and John F. Kennedy. Story 61. The worst thing in the world will happen if you do not send us $11 right now. Story 62. They act as if they brought a fancy napkin to a bazooka fight. Story 63. They refuse to understand that you need to make people want to vote for you and seem to squash anyone who does. Story 64. They have a habit of turning issues that are neutral or bipartisan into purity tests that only make sense in a country-specific context. They focus on conspiracy thinking in the opposing party while ignoring conspiracy thinking within their own party. They constantly mirror the opposing side while acting as if that protects them against manipulation. They claim to support science but often end up creating anti-science narratives. Story 65. It attracts some odd people and has become a de facto home for some fellow travelers who are not really engaged with it. Honestly, it is not my party. I am not that dogmatic, but it is the closest match to my own political views. Story 66. The two-party system. I'm economically liberal and socially conservative. Sometimes when I tell people they say, "Oh, so you're happy no matter who wins?" My response, "No, I'm disappointed no matter who wins." Story 67. Reject purity tests and the insistence on focusing on unpopular social issues. Win first on economic issues. Story 68. Unforced errors. Seriously, just pause for a second before you open your mouth and say something really stupid that they'll beat you over the head with for months. Story 69. Trying to be everything for everyone but ending up nothing for anyone. Story 70. I'm registered as a Democrat in the United States, but as others have said, it is more to prevent the Republican Party from taking control than out of support for the current Democratic Party. The Democrats have been consistently persuaded to reach across the aisle and find common ground with the Republican Party. That is noble in theory, but in the current state of things it often means the center keeps getting pulled further right. They think they are reaching out for a handshake, but it is really a tug of war. The result is a population convinced that policies considered fairly centrist in many other countries are radically left-wing. I will also call them out for being willing to throw their supporters under the bus in the name of reaching out. I am a cisgender gay woman, and the Democrats abandoning their support for the transgender community is very upsetting. The moment you decide that one group of human lives is an acceptable loss from a political perspective, you have started down a dark path. Whenever anyone asks what I want from the party, it is simple. Grow a spine. Fight for all of us. Call this fascist bullshit what it is. Save America while there is still something left to save. Story 71. This is a very American question. In none of the 3 countries I have lived in do people vote along party lines. Instead, they vote on the policies offered in each election. Story 72. I do not really have one right now. Maybe it is for the better. Story 73. My country does not have multiple political parties. It has one party that masquerades as 2 options, and both options equally commit pedophilic crimes, but they follow the same political ideology. Story 74. They tend to form a circular firing squad, verbally sniping at one another instead of uniting against the opposition. Story 75. Inaction. We need to radicalize because the other side already has, and we are not equipped to respond. Story 76. We should never have let the far right in. Cut them loose and pursue more centrist votes through policy shifts. Story 77. Purity politics assumes everyone must be perfect. We will not advance if we cannot extend a little grace. Yes, own up to your mistakes, but those who point fingers have also made mistakes. Story 78. Hall monitor syndrome. Someone who spends an endless amount of time policing people's behavior and language and seeks to ban or heavily regulate anything that could potentially be harmful. Story 79. Often completely undermines the reasons the other side resonates with people emotionally. Story 80. I honestly can't say because I don't know what political party I am. I like ideas from both extremes of American politics. There are rational, logical arguments for many things that parties oppose arbitrarily, often without proof, and I often feel debates aim to limit other people's behavior because some do not trust others to exercise the rights they oppose. The problem is I prefer leadership with self-control and integrity. I cannot find a political party that mirrors my ideals of personal integrity and personal freedom if I am expected to accept one of the 2 major parties as the entirety of my views. That seems arbitrarily limiting and would force me to support causes I am vehemently against because I see the harm they do to everyone. Story 81. As a supporter of Make America Great Again, I want more focus on domestic issues separate from immigration enforcement. Immigration enforcement is important, but we must also address everyday domestic concerns. Story 82. There have been too many compromises with the center and too much inaction on issues that would have the full support of the population. Story 83. Both parties are corrupt. Why do I get daily messages asking me to send more money to the Democrats, whom I already voted for, donated to, called for, and canvassed? I have already done what I can. Maybe grow a spine, do your jobs, and take action instead of expecting me to cater to your lobbyists. Story 84. It is not popular enough to ever elect someone to any real position of power. Story 85. They should have stood up to that bill that made healthcare costs go through the roof back then, rather than waiting until now. They should have rallied to get as many people as possible to reject it, instead of having their own members eventually vote for it by breaking with the party. They had countless opportunities to oppose it, but they waited until the end of the fiscal year, using the excuse that this would help them win the election next year. If they were going to take that stand, they should also have done something about tax brackets. Story 86. They say they are pro-Second Amendment, but really they are just cowards who watch children get slaughtered. Story 87. I dislike both parties and refuse to associate with either. Independent centrists like me are not represented by American politicians. Story 88. They cannot find common ground and vilify anyone who does not agree 100% with the most extreme version of their positions. Story 89. They are spineless as fuck. They are being demolished by the most corrupt party the United States has ever seen, and they still want to play nice. It's fucking weird. Also, they are bought by Israel. Story 90. I do not belong to a party. I am an independent who supports certain liberal and conservative policies and opposes others. Story 91. I do not have one. Voting for someone does not automatically mean you belong to that party. Most voting is simply choosing the least bad option. Story 92. They are poked repeatedly, and when they retaliate, they are called names, so they capitulate. Story 93. I feel that people on the left ignore some gun-related issues in the name of freedom. Not all of them, but enough to make me uneasy. Story 94. Use of tariffs. They support tariffs on imports, and although I am not an economist, I believe a free market is best for a healthy economy. Even if tariffs can be beneficial, many are implemented erratically, appearing one week and disappearing the next. It seems people follow the leader without question, and whatever he says becomes accepted as truth, which is my main concern. Story 95. I don't have a political party. I am politically homeless, as some people like to call it. Story 96. I am not registered with a political party, so I am on my own here. Honestly, she is kind of a bitch. Story 97. They promote victimhood. The more oppressed you are, the more attention you receive, and they profit from that. They cater to extremes rather than moderates. That is why they lost. I am done being loyal because of the attitude that we always vote this way, and I am going to become independent. Story 98. I hate that my party pretends to be for the people, but they are all Harvard graduates who cut regulations and keep using law and order fear-mongering. Democrats are just Republicans without Trump. Story 99. If you have a male respiratory system, then you have a physical advantage in sporting competitions, especially with greater upper body strength. Making sports competitions a hill to die on was a colossal mistake that completely backfired. Story 100. Australian Labour Party member and supporter. Felt segregated during this year's election campaign as a supporter of nuclear power. Members of Parliament are forced to follow party policy and agenda when voting on issues. Story 101. They have no backbone and a defeatist attitude. They do not stand up as they should and are disorganized and fragmented. Lincoln would be appalled. Story 102. Minimal national representation and the need to caucus with Democrats to get anything done in normal circumstances. Story 103. They tend to inspire unflattering remarks about their role being not unlike that of the Washington Generals. You can probably guess what party I'm talking about. Story 104. Controlled opposition, or what all appearances and actions point toward, is the leadership. There is no actual backroom group making a policy book. Story 105. Generally speaking, they are pussy-assed little bitches. They hide behind a self-imposed moral high ground to justify their inaction. Story 106. They are cowards, too afraid to stand up and improve things. We are continuously given weak moderates who care more about maintaining the status quo than pursuing real reform, campaigning only on being better than Donald Trump. We constantly have to vote for awful candidates because the alternative is an open fascist. Story 107, we are a joke. Half of our presidential candidates clearly do not want to be president. Story 108, they are spineless. They need to grow a pair and come out strongly against the opposition party, because at this rate there will be no tomorrow. Story 109, they tank the trajectories of any promising new members who do not back the status quo. They refuse to try to remove money from politics. They are willing to work with the other side to maintain a two-party system. Story 110. They are complacent and satisfied with being right rather than fighting to push their agenda through. Story 111. When in power, they use half measures to avoid provoking the other side or allow even slight procedural resistance to stop them. When out of power, they are powerless to stop anything because others use the same procedural tricks against them. They are willing to pressure or betray left-wing progressives such as Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and David Hogg, but not moderates or Democrats in name only such as Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema. Story 112. Democrats are far too right-leaning, get nothing done, yet say words that rational people want to hear. They try to reach across the aisle to a party that will absolutely not do the same for them. It is hard to watch. I am glad they are standing firm on the shutdown. At least that shows backbone. Story 113. Weak people should fight fire with fire. Story 114. Although I am reluctant to call them my political party, the side I prefer tends toward infighting, self-sabotage, and overzealous behavior that undermines their authenticity, and they often spread themselves too thin trying to defend every marginalized cause at the expense of others. Meanwhile, for better or worse, the other party will follow the strongest to either glory or the ditch. Story 115. The willingness to defend and even glorify a religion that fundamentally rejects my party's values. Story 116. They seem to give up from the beginning. Out of many places I know, I live in a spot where I used to think we would someday push through the bipartisan wall. But after 2 decades, and this year when I heard my local representative go full-on anti-capitalism, I realized we would never win in a town dominated by the country's biggest oil company. Story 117. Our leaders send strongly worded letters to a president who probably doesn't know how to read. Story 118. I'm a Democrat, and the party no longer has a clear message and is tone-deaf nationwide. Obama won the first time on a strong message. They think Democrats will win in swing or Republican areas by going moderate, but they lose every time. Story 119. What happened that really made me rethink a lot was Ken Martin defending taking money from so-called good billionaires, as if such a thing existed. The progressive, left, and liberal demographics do not have a party that represents them. Anyone who believes you are going to shift the Democratic Party back toward them is a fool. I would consider starting a political party, but I am actually working toward emigrating at this point. Fuck all of you. Story 120. You have a pathological need to be the sane ones in the room, constantly trying to educate instead of calling for action. I am looking at you, Alberta New Democratic Party. Story 121. They did next to nothing to prevent a second Trump term. They moved too slowly or not at all, depending on the issue. I do not know whether they assumed he would go away on his own, thought he would be an easy win in the next election, or whether it was something else. For years they focused only on the worst symptom, the January 6th rioters, rather than the underlying problem, and that is why we are in this situation. If I am honest, the complacency of party leadership over at least the last decade is the root problem, probably longer, but President Obama kept attention off them by being in office. Story 122. I do not have a political party. Having voted for candidates from 3 parties, I will answer 3 ways. Republicans do not even try to solve the big problems like housing and health care. Democrats try to solve them by spending public money, which is often the wrong approach. Libertarians are often out of step with most people. Story 123. We are being cowards by not standing up to Republicans. Fight dirty. It is the only way. Story 124. They have no courage to go against the status quo or to call out the bullshit of the other party. I spoke at a town hall about how lowering the flag for a certain Utah event was wrong because we should not glorify white supremacists, neo-Nazis, or anyone who promotes hatred. The head of the town hall said that he was just following orders from the governor and the president. He is an absolutely spineless coward. Story 125. They are tolerating warfare and not using the opportunity they have to destroy their opposition. Maybe in a few weeks it will change. Story 126. I am not a member of any political party. Both are awful in their own ways. One includes Nazis and the other side is lazy as hell. Story 127. The fact is that I only give them unenthusiastic, begrudging votes against the other party, which I view as much worse. Story 128. They will never be significant enough in the United States because first past the post prevents them from electing anyone. If I vote for their candidates, I am actually giving the party I hate most an even better chance of winning. I thus end up voting for the less bad party that supports democracy rather than the worse party that leans toward fascism. In primaries, voting for my party increases the odds of a right-wing blue dog Fetterman-style candidate instead of a milquetoast, center-leaning corporatist. My party is incapable of messaging, organizing, or growing. I agree with them on almost everything and yet I hate them completely. Story 129. They are too worried about precedent and decorum to actually fight for democracy. Story 130. I am not a member of a political party. The two-party system has become very short-sighted, focused on winning the next election. The Senate filibuster is the linchpin. Removing the filibuster rule would bring turmoil, unknown hardships, and possibly war. Whether we remain a republic is questionable. Story 131. They send strongly worded letters instead of getting anything done. Story 132. Who has a political party nowadays? I am a free agent. I dislike both of them. I would give anything for a 1990s Democratic or Republican Party right now. I am currently against Make America Great Again, but that does not mean I support any alternative. Story 133. There are many issues lately, but what bothers me most is their stance on immigration. Story 134. They are my political party. I only have two real options, and even at their best, neither truly represents my values. With spinelessness and constant compromise, they are just a step above worthless. They will also tout the dumbest things as wins while everything else falls apart. Story 135. My party went from being anti-Russia a decade ago to being pro-Russia now. Story 136. There is no unity. For whatever reason, Democrats expect their candidate to be Christ-like and without flaws. If the candidate is not perfect, many will not vote and then complain about the next 4 years when the Republican wins. Story 137. I hate how Democrats are such pussies. A liberal Democrat will be playing chess with a fascist and will watch stoically as the fascist slaps them in the face, picks up one of their pieces and eats it. Then the liberal will move their rook forward and say, "We can still win this if everyone keeps playing by the rules." Story 138. I do not have one anymore. My old one is now fascist. I still disagree with the Democrats on many issues, but I am voting for them anyway because they are not fascist. Story 139. The extreme left Democrats failed to recognize how much they harmed the party's election chances by refusing to help. Incremental change is better than the losses caused by drastic change. Get into power, then make changes. Story 140. When their only redeeming quality is not being fascist, the bar is clearly in hell. Story 141. They care more about process than results. The places they run and control exemplify what they oppose. Story 142. It doesn't really exist. The two parties have drifted farther from my centrist position. Story 143. There are people who are being walked on instead of grouping together and taking out the real threat to freedom in my country. Story 144. The average member is as stupid as the opposing parties, equally willing to believe things simply because someone on their side says so. They seem to have empathy, which generally produces a net benefit. Take what you can get, I guess. Story 145. My party has people who would still never get anywhere in life even if the systems were fairer because they have a loser mindset. They also complain about not finding a good partner but never want to leave the house, even for work. They do not want to have to do anything. Story 146. They have no real influence at the moment. The two major parties have a stranglehold on the American people, due largely to the financial power that large corporations hold over the government. 1/3 of the country not voting does not help matters either. Story 147. It is a third party with little recognition, even though its ideas overlap both the left and the right. Christian Democrats cannot gain a foothold in our dysfunctional two-party system. Our major parties cooperate to suppress third parties. Story 148. Not thinking about what people truly need and not actually working toward a better America with the best possible solutions, instead favoring virtue signaling. Story 149. Any politician must balance catering to Latino Catholics, Black Baptist moderates, and fellow progressives. If you anger progressives, they may withhold their vote to punish the establishment, thereby handing the election to the Republicans, who will, without fail, fall in line to support whatever bigoted oligarch they nominated in the primaries. They did it twice. Story 150. They seem to try to play fair when the other side resorts to every dirty tactic and illegal maneuver in the book. Fuck that, fight fire with fire. Story 151. The left is so obsessed with doing nothing wrong that it forgets to do something right. Story 152. There are leaders doing good work, passing laws that help ordinary people, but they are constantly overlooked and dismissed because they are Midwesterners. The national organization only cares if you are from the coast. Story 153. I hate the lack of unity and the absence of a united front. I do not care if it is some generic blue dog Democrat or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They need to draw a line in the sand and stick to one message. Pick a strategy and pursue it. I hope they do not fold on the Affordable Care Act subsidies now that they are doing that. Story 154. My own party does not have my best interests at heart. They are beholden to the same billionaire assholes who bankroll and therefore own the other side. Story 155. If you dislike a party, switch to another. It is not difficult. Story 156. It doesn't exist. We only get two choices, and both tend to select the most extreme left or right candidate available. Most people choose one party and ultimately go all in on everything that party believes, even when they do not personally agree. No wonder we are so divided. Story 157. Their unwillingness to take risks and make a firm stand, opting to be moderate and wishy-washy, ultimately helps their rivals achieve their goal. Story 158. The problem with Democratic leadership is Obama. He still pulls the strings, and that makes the party look vague and rudderless. Story 159. My party would much rather feel good about a loss than win dirty. If you do not get elected, you do not get to help people. I do not care how much you have to suck Satan's dick to get into office. Just make sure to fuck him over while you are in office. Story 160. The Democratic Party is anything but. I was a state-level delegate for Bernie Sanders in 2016. The rigging was so blatant it was Hillary's turn and the people were supposed to shut the hell up. If the primary had been fair, we would never have gotten Donald Trump. Story 161. It is often too weak and soft to get things done. It only brings about change when pressured and continues to serve capitalism. Story 162. Democrats only deliver results that are palatable to corporate interests. Social change? Fine. They will make a gesture but will not enshrine it. Goodbye Roe versus Wade. Universal health care? Universal basic income? No, those cut into profits. I am leaning toward communism at this point. I do not believe them anymore. If the right is willing to burn it down for moron rule, the left can do the same. Story 163. Too much arguing among ourselves when there is so much at stake. It drives me mad. Focus. Story 164. There is a preoccupation with maintaining the status quo or with the demonization of reactive policy. Story 165. My political party is the one that pretends not to be evil rather than the openly evil one. It would not be my first or second choice, but there are only two options. Story 166. Catering, pandering to fucking every single group. Not playing in the mud with the other assholes. Conversely, religious wackos don't and won't compromise. Guns are the only hill they will die on. I shit on both sides. Story 167. I am a proud Democrat, but the party has catered to small minority groups at the expense of many voters. I do not understand why we continue to alienate large swaths of voters to avoid upsetting a very small but vocal group. They have outsized influence, and it shows. Story 168. The leadership is spineless, and it is overdue for new Senate and House leaders. Story 169. I don't feel that either party really understands basic American needs. That said, I dislike my party because I feel like they are so out of touch. They say a lot but do very little. They say they disagree, they speak of outrage, and then do nothing. They hold meetings, set agendas, and write strongly worded letters, but nothing gets done. In the meantime, they have given us lukewarm candidates who are not appealing. All the while, they are also cozying up to corporations, looking at you, Pelosi. They give performative speeches on the floor for 25 hours and then vote to confirm a bunch of Trump appointees, looking at you, Booker. The list could go on. Story 170. Do not obsess over decorum when your opponents do not play by the rules. Story 171. It is not a political party. Rather, it is a broad tent of left-wing ideologies that often bicker among themselves. Story 172. They can never win anything. I am in the independent party, and it is unfortunate that it is not even a realistic option. Story 173. I am still registered as an independent, but if we go with the party I most often vote for, my least favorite thing about them is their voters. Story 174. Choosing a party and standing by them no matter what only divides us further. This is not a football match. Story 175. The idea that 350 million people can be neatly divided into two parties is absolutely ridiculous. Sorry for dodging the question. Story 176. Pandering to newly developed, made-up social constructs and virtue signaling rather than focusing on what 99% of party voters actually care about. Story 177. Too often, we forget why the party name bears the word social. Story 178. They didn't finish the cleanup after January 6th. If you had put the necessary criminals in prison for the right length of time, we would not have today's issues. The discussion should have been between capital punishment and life without parole, since the Constitution dictates capital punishment for their crime. Instead, we went soft, they abused that softness to gain power, and now we have a fascist government in charge, if not a soon-to-be dictatorship. All because we elected a soft Joe Biden. No more soft Democrats. They must put in a liberal or they will lose. Story 179. As an independent, I dislike that there are not more sensible people who realize the two parties serve the rich and pander to the poor. It's just a matter of which elites profit more. Do people who are struggling really believe their side actually cares about them? Story 180. Not supporting a candidate because of a single issue you disagree with. Some people did not support Kamala Harris because of a few different single issues they disagreed with. She did not hate guns. She said there should be somewhat more control over how easy it is to obtain them. She also did not explicitly say that Israel was committing genocide against the Palestinian people. The Democratic Party is letting perfection be the enemy of good. If overzealous people who were completely opposed to Israel or completely opposed to all guns had not stayed home on Election Day, we might have avoided having this geriatric, psychotic, spineless, warmongering, Epstein-linked individual in charge of one of the most powerful militaries and economies of the modern age. Story 181. They will not dirty their hands to do good enough. They barely scrape by at a borderline acceptable level. Story 182. That is a great question. Personally, I accept that no one party has all the answers. It is not possible, so it is okay to agree with the other side's perspective on certain issues. I am Canadian and typically vote left-leaning, but I do think sometimes they lack follow-through, at least with the last leader we had. We are still early in this current liberal era, but I fear they will ultimately continue to do so. Story 183. They mainly say what they are against, not what they are for. They cannot communicate effectively to save their lives or to defend democracy. Story 184. It is strange to assume I belong to a single party. I do not always vote for the same one. Story 185. They give in to the Republican Party so quickly and pretend they did something moral while literally harming everyone. Story 186. They claim they want to help people, but are cutting funding for programs that provide assistance. I am referring to the New York government. Story 187. The Purity Olympics have become excessive. There is a subset of the left that is more concerned with flaunting a sense of moral and ideological superiority than with advocating for positive change. It is highly performative and makes the entire party look bad. Story 188. It is not one of the two dominant political parties because a supermajority is required to do anything. Story 189. We are never taken seriously and are seen as being on the fence because we are not part of the two main parties. Both parties often view you with suspicion because they assume you agree with the side they oppose, which makes you a traitor. They expect you to go all in on one party. Story 190. I am against the death penalty. I think if you meticulously kill many people, there is no fixing you. Story 191. Any threat of name-calling or action that is not immediate virtue signaling is enough to cow them into a corner. Story 192. Democrats, instead of taking the high road, be more assertive. It is time to end this childish behavior. Story 193. They have no backbone or fighting spirit. It drives me crazy. Story 194. The Democrats cannot get their act together or find a strong leader. Chuck Schumer needs to retire. We need fewer of him and more Jasmine Crockett and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. People with the courage to stand up to the Republicans. Story 195. Corporate entanglement and sticking to tradition, even if it harms everyone. Story 196. After Charlie Kirk, many people said that is what happens when you constantly label someone a Nazi, fascist, or racist. I agreed. But do not pretend the right has not also engaged in name-calling. It is not about which side does it more. What matters is that both sides do it. If we want to stop demonizing people with exaggerated labels such as traitor, Nazi, or fascist, everyone needs to stop. I do not care how justified you feel making the claim. A man was publicly assassinated by someone who genuinely believed him to be a fascist. A fascist does not engage in open, free debate while allowing the challenger to choose the topic. Story 197. They are cowards who will always fail to press an advantage. It is frustrating when the other side is productive but moving in the wrong direction. Story 198. How much time do you have? 1. I hate that my party is seemingly controlled exclusively by the oldest people alive. We were harmed by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Joe Biden, and Dianne Feinstein all insisting on staying in office or running while being extremely old and barely able to walk or talk. Ginsburg, after an amazing life on the Supreme Court and building a respected legacy, refused to step down during Barack Obama's term despite serious illness. She died, Republicans refused to confirm a replacement, and now we have a conservative Supreme Court that has destroyed many of our rights. Feinstein missed dozens of crucial votes in the Senate because she had dementia and could not walk. On more than one occasion she voted the wrong way because she forgot her position. And of course we have Biden, who harmed us in many ways, including dragging his feet on prosecutions for Donald Trump and arming and funding a genocide that contributed to Democratic losses. He also refused to step down until he was forced to, which undermined our chances of stopping the current authoritarian trends. 2. I also hate that the Democratic Party is very conservative. They dislike people like Mahmoud Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, or anyone actually on the left. They refuse to pursue universal health care, to be tough on big business, to tax billionaires, and they constantly defend the Republican Party. From Biden praising Mitch McConnell to Barack Obama refusing to challenge George W. Bush over many war crimes. Obama defended the Bush drone program and oversaw strikes that killed many civilians, which made it harder for Democrats to criticize drone policies later. 3. I hate their weakness. They lost 2 elections to Donald Trump, an elderly demagogue who spreads wild lies and has a long record of alleged crimes. A man who was close to Jeffrey Epstein, and neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris ran ads about that during the election. Why? Because Bill Clinton was also close to Epstein. These people have managed to lose elections to a dangerous demagogue because of how weak, cowardly, and incompetent they are. Story 199. I dislike that my party is only a marginally better version of the other one. Being left of the far right is not really left. It is only closer to the center and still fairly right. Story 200. They are spineless, barely stand up for the people they are supposed to protect, and are easily steamrolled. Story 201. Too many of them are controlled by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. They need to be defeated in a primary election. Story 202. What do you mean by own political party? I vote on legislation or support what certain people or parties think should happen. I do not have a fixed party because that only creates division. With each piece of legislation, new challenges arise that need solutions, and different parties offer different answers, so I choose the ones that seem best. This is how the system is supposed to work. Do not cling to parties or politicians. They must be held accountable, because if you hang on to a party or person, they can do anything they want. Story 203. I was tired of the Republican Party acting like wimps, but fortunately, Trump ended that quite handily. Story 204. By the 1990s, we had won over the majority of Americans with our decades-long platform based on economic justice for the working class and the poor, and then we threw it all away to focus on identity politics. Story 205. I do not pay attention to politics, and I could not care less about any political party. Story 206. If liberals are so smart, why do they always lose? Story 207. They are a bunch of fucking pussies. At least the leaders are. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.